Hello everybody, Mike Tenney here at the Tenney School. We are here for Tenney Vlog 14. Today's vlog is about group or individual learning. And we have a special guest expert today to talk about this topic. One of our very own actually wrote a thesis on this very topic, so I know that you'll be interested in digging in with us. For those of you new to our channel, the Tenney Vlog is a series of videos that we have put together to address topics of interest to parents and educators trying to help their students achieve the next level of success academically. And if you like us, we would love for you to subscribe to our channel or leave us a comment down below, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic and write back and forth to you. So without further ado, here is our Tenney Vlog 14. All right, well, hello again, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to our guest expert here today. Today we have Caitlyn Waterman, one of our very own, here to talk about individual versus student learning. And before we get into it, Caitlyn, you want to just give us a little bit of your background and why you are the expert on this topic?
Sure. So I graduated in 2011 from Penn State with a degree in psychology. And I was teaching middle school math outside of Boston when I went to Fitchburg State to get my Master of Education degree.
Okay. And for your thesis, what did you do?
I looked at the differences between individual and group learning, specifically in math.
Okay, so we thought this is a perfect topic for us as a school and for parents and educators out there to hear a little bit about, especially since we are an individual school. So before we kind of get into the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches, why don't you set up your thesis experiment for us a little bit, just so how it worked? And
yeah, perfect. So I taught a lesson to 2 classes of 8th graders on a topic they had never seen before. I had a control group which did all individual learning, individual practice, and my experimental group was groups within the classroom. So everyone was paired in a 4-person group, and they had to work with their peers.
Okay. Now, did you teach? Were they 2 different classrooms, or were they mixed together?
It was 2 different classrooms. So
okay.
One was a class of 20 where everyone worked alone, and one was a class of 20 where there were 5 groups.
Okay. So you taught them a lesson. Then the key difference was how they worked on the lesson or worked on the assignments,
exactly.
whether they did individually or in a group. And then you had a pre and a post test?
Yes, so they did a pre-test prior to seeing anything about the lesson, and then a post-test at the culmination of the unit.
Okay, so looking at the pre and post test, that would then give you an idea of which type of learning was better.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so that's the setup and a little bit about our expert here. So let's talk about each of these groups. So the first group was the control group, who were the kids that had to learn on their own after the lesson was given. And it's the control group because this is kind of the normal way.
Yeah,
okay.
So typically kids were allowed to work with their peers, but they were never forced into a group.
Okay.
So this was more the typical.
Okay. And so what were some of the strengths of this group?
So you had to do the work yourself. There was no getting your friend to do it or copying. You were really forced to do it yourself, so you really had to learn it. So you were really held accountable for that learning.
Okay. And then what might be the weaknesses of that type of group?
So you do lose perspective and feedback from other students, especially if it's something that they might have touched on in chemistry or another class.
Okay.
Someone might be able to say, hey, we did this in chemistry 2 days ago,
okay.
where I don't have that perspective because I'm not with them all the time.
Okay.
And then also when you're working by yourself, you tend to give up more easily because you know that the teacher's there and the teacher's going to help you.
Okay.
Whereas if you're in a group, you might hang on a little longer.
Okay. So I think, so individually you said that it's better because they're forced to do the problem on their own and not be over-reliant on other students. The negatives were sometimes in a group you can make a connection to other contexts, or you might be able to get past a hump that you would have individually if you have other people to lean on.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so let's flip over then to the group learning group. So what were the strengths that you saw of the kids that had learned in group after the lesson was assigned?
So when there's uneven group participation, the stronger participators actually learn more because they're doing all of the work, essentially even maybe doing it all of by themselves.
Okay.
So they end up getting more out of it than maybe a weaker student would.
Okay.
They also get feedback and perspective from other students, so that can
Okay.
be helpful if they're stuck. And there's a strength in numbers type feel, so you might feel more comfortable taking a risk or getting over that hump when you have other people who are in the same boat.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense. So the group, particularly the kids that did a lot of the work, were benefited
Right.
from that. And then we talked about just having a group, having that shared suffering, if you will,
Right, yeah.
allowed them to kind of overcome some challenges that maybe they wouldn't have individually.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So we've talked about how this experiment was set up. We've talked about the strengths and weaknesses of the group that had to work on their own after the lesson. We've talked about the strengths and weaknesses of the group that could work with other students after their lesson. So what were your findings?
So the control group, the group that had to work independently, had bigger pre to post test gains than the group learning
Okay.
sample.
And was this as you expected it to be?
It was not. I was
Okay.
expecting that the experimental group would do 20% better,
Okay.
and it was not the case. They started out higher in their pretest scores, but
Okay.
the gains were less.
Okay, so just the randomization of the experiment, it turned out that the individual group was lower
Right.
than the group, and then the gains that the individual group showed were more.
Yes.
Now, tell me why you thought that the group would do better. What was your hypothesis?
Yeah. So I really thought that getting feedback from other students would be helpful, but I really also thought that the strength and suffering mentality might really push kids to try harder.
Okay. So we talked about this a little bit before we came on. We've been talking about why it might be one versus the other. For me as a student, I was always much better on my own than in a group. But I can see some of what you're saying about, when you are on your own, you have to learn the content yourself.
Exactly.
And when you're in the group, you can social loaf. And the group may get the concept, but you individually don't. So then when you take that test later on, you don't actually have the concept retained. But the stronger members of the group may be more likely to do better because they are, learning for everybody.
Right, exactly.
And they're actually teaching. So there's what's the saying about you don't really know something until you have to teach it.
Right.
And so the kids that are stronger in the group may actually do better because they've had to teach their peers a little bit.
Right.
So were there any kind of follow-ups to, so a key point here though is, so what's the big caveat on, yes, the individual group did better, but?
It's not statistically significant. So based on the sample size, my p-value was found that this could have just been due to chance. So we can't conclusively say that it's better at this point.
Okay. Any other thoughts on, so if you were going to do the experiment again, any thoughts on what you might do differently?
I would have a much larger sample size.
Okay.
And it would be kind of hard, 'cause especially at a smaller school, you don't have a ton of students, but maybe pulling in from other teachers as well, just to see how the larger numbers play out, and also maybe even seeing individual differences within different classrooms.
Okay. And I think, style of learning, like we talked about, for my style of learning, I actually do better individually. Some other learning styles may be better in a group.
Right, yeah, considering that would definitely be helpful as well.
That came to mind to me. And I remember when I was in study groups in college, we wasted a lot of time in those study groups. So sometimes it's not as productive as it could be. At least that was my experience. Okay, is there any other things that you want to mention that we should talk about in talking about individual versus group learning?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that if students have the opportunity to choose and one method is clearly not detrimental to them, like if they're just socializing, don't let them work in a group. But if all things are equal, letting them choose is typically a good option.
Because they'll know what their learning style is, and then they'll pick the group that's better, more beneficial to them.
Right.
That's a very good point. Also, at the Tenney School, we have both individual and group learning. So I think just the fact that you did this study and you could see the strengths and weaknesses of both groups, it kind of points to why we have that here at our school, where we do teach primarily one-to-one in the core subjects, but we also have group learning that can be used in ways to help kids that don't benefit as much from the individual learning,
right,
and vice versa, clearly. All right, well, very interesting. This is a very fascinating topic, and like you said, it's kind of ironic that you ended up at a school like this after writing about that for your thesis. Thank you for coming out and doing this with us, and we will see you guys next time. Okay, well, that is it for our vlog today, everybody. I hope you guys found this information useful and helpful. And as we talked about earlier, we'd love for you to share this content. We'd love you to subscribe to our channel, like our page, comment down below so we can hear from you and hear your thoughts on group versus individual learning. All right, we will see you next time.